Hello, very beautiful community. You haven't gone crazy. I haven't gone crazy. But yes, we're going to talk about football or soccer. Now, it's the festive period and it's lovely to have a few one-off chats about silly topics. So that's all we're going to do over the next few days, as well as carrying on the serious analytical chats. I often feel sort of able to sit up, but my brain's pretty fried. I'm struggling with some symptoms, so having a light chat about something like this is actually wonderful. So I'll try to make it as uplifting as possible for you if you like football. If you don't, you really probably should come back next time, unless you have a voyeuristic interest in observing me talk about something that doesn't make any sense. Now, I've scrolled through Patreon and DMs, and it's shocking how many football questions there are. Vlad, who's going to win the World Cup? Who's better, Lampard, Scholes or Gerrard? And I won't go through them, but instead do something a bit cheesy. And that is try to put together a best all-time 11. You do that in the comments if you like the game, and I'll try to do that here. Now, my relationship with football is that now, for health reasons, for years now, I'm not able to watch 90-minute matches. It's just not a time investment I can make. Even when it comes to World Cup final, it's a sort of a borderline case whether I'm going to watch. But my historic bank of football engagement is completely out of control. And that's how I can still keep up, even by allocating just 10 minutes a week to watching football now. In the teenage period, I was considering as a side job, as well as being a philosopher, of course, being a football coach. And I took it seriously. I invested hours of thought into it a day. I stood on football pitches in the middle of the night with a notepad, thinking about how space is collectively manipulated by 11 humans within these particular weird dimensions. And I thought about tactics, and infinitesimally informally did a tiny bit of coaching. So I have this relationship whereby I almost don't touch football now, but the deep obsession I suffered from in the past means I can very rapidly reconnect myself, even by engaging for a few minutes. So let's do the best all-time 11. Now, I think it's not going to be balanced. It's going to be a crazy 11, because that's going to be more fun. Well, let's give it a go. Goalkeeper. I am close to having a very controversial view, potentially. And that is that Manuel Neuer will not be in this team, but if he had continued playing at his best across the entirety of his career, he would. Because he isn't unique as a sweeper keeper in the modern age, but he did articulate the role in a way that nobody could touch. And I do think that he's not in this team because it was only for a couple of years that he played on such a transcendent level that goes beyond what world-class sweeper keepers like Ter Stegen or Edison do. So who we're going to put in? We're going to put in another keeper for a similar reason, and that's Lev Yashin. Yashin wasn't the first sweeper keeper in football history by any means, but he was unique in taking the role as far as he did, while also being such a great goalkeeper. So not just for his qualities on the line, but for his transformational contribution to the role, we're going to put him in. Now, on the left, we're going to go for a back four. On the left, we're going to put Paolo Maldini. Maldini is an historic figure, even though he's still young. Must be 1968 year of birth, something like that. So he's in his 50s. And as well as consistency, that's so important. I don't mean consistency across his career, I mean consistency across 92, 94 minutes, not 88 minutes, 94 minutes. Maldini was probably the most, or at least unsurpassed, in his regalness while performing negative tasks. Nobody tackled with greater elegance. Nobody did a slide tackle that was more controlled than Maldini. And Maldini even had a unique capacity to redirect the ball while slide tackling. So he's going to take the left back position. Now, in the middle, we have to choose between putting proper defenders, as the English would say, or putting sweepers. And the age of the sweeper is over now. But it was over fairly recently, right? The 1990s was still an extraordinary age of great sweeper teams, great sweeper players, attacking teams and defensive teams who utilized formations like my favorite formation from the 90s that I was very obsessed with, which is 1, 2, 3, 2, 2. Sweeper, 2 centre backs, holding midfield player, left wing back, right wing back, 2 midfield players, attacking midfield players, and perhaps a 10 and a 9 up front. There were wonderful offensive instantiations of that in 1990s European football, but also defensive ones. The German national team is actually underappreciated for utilizing that formation very effectively in the middle 90s with Zama as sweeper, Dieter Eilts, a much underestimated player in the holding position, and Sieger Reuter, and then a good choice of centre back Sieger Reuter in the wing back positions. So what I'm saying is I'm very fond of the sweeper position, even though it's out of date now. And I'm also extremely fond of the holding midfield position, which is not out of date, but I think we might need to skip it just to back in enough superstars. So anyway, sweeping. What sweepers do we use? We're going to put 2 sweepers in the centre back positions. Let's go Franco Baresi. When we talk about football players, we often ask 2 questions, and the answer is normally no for both and almost always no for the second. The first question is, does the player understand their role? The second question is, does the player understand the role of everybody else on the pitch? For most professional, even famous footballers, the answer is not always yes, even to the first question. Right? I mean, you look at a very interesting trajectory of Luke Shaw on the left side for Manchester United, for example, a player who could not understand, despite having enormous talent, his own role. And eventually he got there, and now he does. But on top of that, there is the question, do you understand everybody else's role? Can you read everything that happens on the pitch? And Maldini was somebody who could do that, and had an extraordinary capacity to anticipate in defense, and didn't suffer much for his relative lack of height. In the center defense position, he's about 1.78 meters. So that's one. Who's going to be next to him? I think we have to go for Franz Beckenbauer, who could easily play in midfield for us. And with Beckenbauer, who is a much greater player than Baresi, you have not just a positive answer to these 2 questions. Can he read his role? Can he read everybody else's role? But you have also another quality, perhaps on an unmatched level, and that is a capacity to play organically in the widest range of positions on the pitch. Nobody was more effortlessly multifunctional at such a high level in the history of football than Franz Beckenbauer. Now we need a right back, Gary Neville. I'm joking. Let's say for work rate and dedication, consistency actually could be Neville. But as talent matters so much, we're going to have to choose between probably Cafu and Carlos Alberto, and both are reasonable choices. From an efficiency standpoint, you could choose Cafu, but let's choose Carlos Alberto, again for effervescence in expressing the position. And of course, Carlos Alberto could actually play as a right wing back, the way Maldini couldn't. But I think one of the reasons that Carlos Alberto gets over the line is that moments of moment matter in football too. And he is the one who converted the greatest collective goal in the history of football in the final of the 1970 World Cup for Brazil. So now we come to the Holden midfield position, where we should really put Lothar Matthäus or Sergio Busquets. And with Busquets, it's important to be direct. At his role, nobody was better in the history of the game. Sometimes we're slow to call that out when it's contemporaneous for us, but we should do it. But why don't we be ludicrous and just abandon the Holden position and just put in 3 attacking players into the midfield? One's going to be Diego Maradona. Let's put him on the right of 3 midfielders. So we're going to go 4-3-3. On the right of 3 midfielders is going to be Diego Maradona. Nobody brought greater aesthetic pleasure to manipulation of a football in the history of the game as Maradona did. So there is the aesthetic case for saying he is the greatest player of all time. The effective case is probably strongest for Lionel Messi, who is also going to be inevitably in our team. So who are we going to put in the middle of the pitch next to Maradona? Let's put Pele, who could easily be in the centre-forward position, but as we're being ludicrous, let's just shove Pele into midfield and benefit from his remarkable, multifunctional talent. There is a little bit less epistemic certainty when establishing Pele's greatness than Maradona's, because we have much more tape. But I do think the case is strong that Pele is, easily one of the greatest players of all time. And then on the left, ludicrously in midfield, on the left of the 3, we can put somebody who could easily be put up front, and that's Johan Cruyff. And Cruyff is an interesting choice because I could accept both an omission of him from a greatest 11 of all time, but also the selection of him as the greatest player of all time. Because what's most remarkable in him is that he, more than any player of his era, incarnated a stylistic revolution in football. Because of that, you can go either way with Cruyff, but that's what makes me feel that I have to include him and awkwardly put him in midfield, where you could have had, Platini, Zidane. So that's the midfield 3. It's highly embarrassing, but that's my choice. Now up front on the right, we're going to put Messi, who is the player about whom the case that he is the greatest of all time is probably easiest to make. On the left, controversially, and I do think it's more controversial than it might seem in our age, but controversially, I'm going to put Ronaldo. I do think that a lot of people would put him in, Cristiano Ronaldo, but I think that I find that a controversial choice. The reason he is in is because he is better than anyone in that team when it comes to sports psychology. Nobody had a greater talent for developing and cultivating and adjusting their talent across that bow, that's the timing of a football career, than Ronaldo. There's a lot of good players in very recent history who were poor at this, right? Just think of how badly, let's say, Steven Gerrard failed to adjust when he needed to play a different game to the explosive game, which was him all his career. And when that adjustment needed to be made, the mind and the body misaligned. Frank Lampard did better at that kind of adjustment. So this is really hard, and Ronaldo has been extraordinary at it. He's converted himself from essentially a left winger to one of the greatest poachers of all time and the greatest header of the ball of all time. So for reasons of sports psychology, he's in. So who's up front? It could have been Maradona, it could have been Pele, it could have been Cruyff, could be Di Stefano, could also be in midfield. But I'm going to say Ronaldo Nazario, and here I'm going to contradict myself a bit, because I do think longevity matters, but like with Neuer, Ronaldo Nazario, the Brazilian Ronaldo, only played at his best for a couple of years of his career. He may have been the best striker in the world for many more years of his career, but he wasn't the greatest striker of all time by then, with so many injuries having hampered him. So it's a strange choice because I'm looking at a very narrow peak, but that peak is so extraordinary that in it he was indisputably the greatest centre forward of all time. So that is my preposterously unbalanced team. Tell me yours, and lots of love.